This happened about 6 years ago when I moved into my first apartment on my own. It was a quiet neighborhood, full of semi-detached houses with well-kept gardens and lights that went out early. My apartment had a big living room window that looked directly into the house across the street, and I could see their living room. It was all pretty normal, a brown sofa, a bookshelf full of books. But after a few weeks, something started to bother me. The neighbor. He was an elderly, thin man with disheveled white hair and a faded blue bathrobe. He was always sitting in the living room armchair, staring in my direction. Morning, afternoon, night, he was there, motionless. I felt watched all the time, that unsettling feeling of not having any privacy. What made me most nervous was the way he looked. At first, I thought he might have some kind of physical problem, like the after effects of a stroke or another neurological issue. But it wasn't a passive stare. It was a fixed gaze that seemed to be studying my every move. I started closing the curtains, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It was as if those eyes were still there, piercing through the fabric. One day, returning from work, the temperature was lower, and a thin mist was already rising from the asphalt. I approached my door, fumbling for my keys in my pocket, and felt a shiver when I looked at my mailbox. There was a small card. The paper was rough and the handwriting was shaky, as if an old hand had written it. Something told me it had to do with that old man. I opened it, and my heart stopped. It said, "Your window is open. Be careful." I went inside, locked everything, and threw myself on the sofa. After a moment of hesitation, my heart racing, my mind unsure if it was real, if I should brush it off, or if I should look out the window, I decided to look. And there he was, staring fixedly at my window. The streetlight illuminated his armchair. He was sitting, looking at my house, and I could see the silhouette of his face. He had a smile, a minimal, almost imperceptible smile, as if he knew he had scared me. And he had. I called the police, explained what had happened, but they just told me they couldn't do anything as he hadn't committed any crime. I moved out a week later. This story didn't happen to me, but to a friend of mine. It was in late 2017 when his son, a little boy named Gabriel, was about 5 years old. The boy had an imaginary friend he called Shadow. At first it was cute, even expected based on what they'd read about his age. He said they played hide and seek and that Shadow was very good at it. But what was supposed to be innocent began to get sinister. My friend and his wife would hear strange noises in the middle of the night, laughter even while the child was sleeping, the soft sound of footsteps in the corridor, but they couldn't see anything. It was all strange, but they always found a rational explanation. The house is old, or it must be street noise, things like that. However, things got scarier when they started finding things out of place. Food that disappeared from the fridge, objects that moved from room to room. They thought they were just being forgetful, but the frequency was too much to be just forgetfulness. One day, my friend was in the attic to fix a leak, and he smelled a strong odor of mold and dust. He realized that a part of the wall seemed hollow. When he pushed it, he found a small passage that led to a storage area on the roof. Inside, he found a dirty old mattress, some blankets, and what looked like stacks of empty chip bags and juice boxes. But what made my friend scream and panic was his son's favorite stuffed animal, which had been missing for weeks. It was there, lying on the mattress, dirty, as if it had been handled daily. At that moment, they realized that their son's imaginary friend was not imaginary. It was a real person who lived in the attic. They called the police immediately. When they arrived, my friend explained the situation and the police conducted a thorough search of the house until they found a basement window with a broken latch. That's how the Shadow would come and go. They didn't find anyone there that day, but knowing that someone was silently moving through their house, playing with their son, while they lived their lives normally, was terrifying enough for my friend and his family to move out immediately. They still wonder how they never noticed anything, how it was possible for someone to be practically invisible like that. But at the same time, they're grateful that nothing serious happened to their family. It was in the winter of 2023. The house across the street had been empty for months. The windows were like lifeless eyes, dark and dirty. I didn't care until one night I noticed a blinking light in the second-floor window. It was a fast white dot that broke the heavy darkness of the early morning. At first I thought it was a reflection, and I even looked around to find where the light was coming from, but after a few nights, the pattern continued. I started paying attention and realized that the light wasn't random. It pulsed at a strange rhythm. After my curiosity was piqued, I thought it might mean something, and harmlessly grabbed paper and a pen. I sat on my living room floor trying to decipher the message using Morse code, which I knew a little bit about. With the help of an online guide, I managed to translate the first letters. It was working. It was forming words that made sense. But when I formed the first sentence, my blood ran cold. My heart started beating so fast I swore the neighbor could hear it. It said, "We are watching you." My eyes widened, the hair on my arms stood up, and I froze for a moment. The fear was real. We? Who were they? What did they want from me? Were they real? How could someone live in that house? There was nothing inside the house. It was empty. Millions of thoughts raced through my mind in that instant. In a panic, I called the police, told them more or less what had happened, and the way I told it, they understood I had been threatened. When they arrived, they searched the house and the surrounding area, but found nothing and no one. The house was empty, with no signs of invasion or that someone was living there. At most, there were some papers and normal dirt from a move-in. A little embarrassed, this time I calmly told them about the message. The police looked at me with suspicion, said they couldn't do anything, made themselves available if something serious happened, and left. I sat on my bed with all the lights off. The silence of the night was heavy. I felt exhausted but couldn't sleep. Then I heard a soft sound, something tapping on my window. It was on my bedroom window. It wasn't branches or anything from the street, as the window was far from anything. I jumped and stood motionless by the bed. I thought for a moment it was my imagination, but the sound repeated, louder now. I approached the window, pulled back the curtains, and I could see the silhouette of something or someone among the bushes outside the house. And on my window pane, in the reflection of the cold street lamp's glow, there were 3 fingerprints smudged with dirt. I made sure all the doors and windows of the house were closed the curtains, and stayed in the living room, awake all night, with the television on, so I wouldn't hear noises and would try not to think about what had happened. I don't know if it was someone playing a prank on me. All I know is that it was enough for me to move the next day. I've never looked at a window the same way again. I grew up camping. Forests were always places of peace to me. The smell of pine needles, the soft ground beneath the tent, the way the wind carried through the branches at night. But there was one trip, years ago, that I still can't explain. It was late autumn in Ohio, cool enough that the night air bit through layers of clothing. My 2 friends and I had been hiking all afternoon, and by the time we found a clearing to set up our tents, the sun was already disappearing behind the treetops. We ate, talked, let the fire burn low, and by midnight we were zipped up inside, ready to sleep. Sometime after, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. Maybe the cold, maybe the way the ground shifted slightly under me. But then I heard it. Footsteps.
At first, they were faint, just the crunch of leaves being pressed into the dirt. But the longer I lay still, the clearer they became. Someone, or something, was walking around the tent. Slow, measured, circling. I told myself it had to be an animal, maybe a deer nosing around for scraps. But the sound wasn't 4 legs, it was 2. A steady rhythm, heel to toe, dragging slightly like boots. The steps drew closer. I whispered my friend's name, and she stirred awake. I didn't need to say anything else. The look on her face told me she heard it too. Then the breathing started. It was heavy, uneven, right against the thin nylon wall. I felt the tent fabric tremble, like someone was leaning on it, exhaling directly into the material. My heart pounded so hard I thought whoever was outside would hear it. We didn't move. We didn't unzip the tent door. We didn't shine a light. Every instinct in my body screamed to stay absolutely still. The steps resumed, circling again, slower this time. We counted them, straining our ears in the silence between. Sometimes they stopped completely, leaving us waiting in the darkness, afraid of what might come next. Minutes dragged into hours. At one point, I almost convinced myself to call out, to demand who was there, but I couldn't force the words. I knew somehow that if I acknowledged it, things would get worse. Sometime near dawn, exhaustion finally overtook us. When the sunlight woke me, it felt like the nightmare had ended, but outside, there was nothing. The ground was damp from morning dew, soft enough that even a rabbit would have left prints. But all around the tent, there was no sign. Not a footprint, not a broken twig, not a trace that anyone or anything had walked there at all. To this day, I can still hear that breathing if I think too hard about it. The strangest thing about this story is how ordinary it began. I was camping in Washington State, alone, on a flat stretch of ground beneath tall pines. I'd hiked the area before and knew the land well. The nearest creek was a quarter-mile downhill. That night, the air was calm, crisp. I lay in my tent reading by flashlight until my eyes grew heavy. Then I turned it off and let the forest take over. But soon, I began to hear something odd. Water. At first it was faint, like the trickle of a brook somewhere in the distance. But slowly it grew louder, clearer, until it sounded like a rushing stream flowing just inches from my head. Confused, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The ground was dry, covered in pine needles. I walked a few feet, sweeping my flashlight around. No water, no puddles, nothing. The sound was gone. Relieved, I climbed back inside. Minutes later, it returned. Louder this time, rushing past my ears as if the tent was pitched on the banks of a river that didn't exist. I pressed my hands to the ground, dry, solid. But the sound continued, filling my head, drowning out every other noise. Then came the movements. Small, deliberate rustles in the brush around the tent. Something was circling me, shifting the leaves, stepping lightly as if it didn't want to be noticed. The sound of the phantom stream and the circling movement blended into a nightmare symphony that lasted until the first gray light of morning. When I finally emerged, the forest was silent. I walked the perimeter. The soil was untouched. No tracks, no water, nothing. Sometimes I think I was hearing something from another place, something I was never meant to hear. I was about 19 when my cousin and I decided to spend a weekend camping in the hills outside town. We chose a small clearing far from any marked campsite. The idea was to get away from everything. No lights, no noise, no other people. Just the two of us and the stars. That night, we sat by the fire until the wood burned down to glowing embers. We talked quietly, watching the silhouettes of trees shift in the breeze. When we finally crawled into our tent, it felt like the forest itself was tucking us in. I don't know how long I had been asleep when it happened. Suddenly, the tent was filled with light. It wasn't the orange flicker of fire or the dull yellow of a flashlight. This light was pure white, almost silver, spilling through the fabric like the walls themselves were glowing. It seemed to come from above, vertical, as if the sky had opened and poured it down on us. I sat frozen, every nerve in my body screaming to move but unable to. My cousin clutched my arm so tightly I thought she'd cut off my circulation. Then the footsteps began. They were slow, deliberate, pacing around the tent. Not random, not aimless. It was like someone, or something, was measuring the ground, circling, waiting. I wanted to unzip the tent, but my body refused. My jaw was locked. My chest felt like it was full of ice. All we could do was listen as the steps drew closer, pausing sometimes right beside our heads before resuming. Then just like that, the light vanished. The silence that followed was almost worse than the sound itself. Even the crickets had stopped. The entire forest felt dead, as if everything was holding its breath. When I finally dared to check my watch, my stomach turned. We had gone to bed around midnight, but somehow it was nearly 4 a.m. Neither of us remembered those missing hours. No dreams, no time passing. Just the glow, the footsteps, then nothing. In the morning, we packed up without a word. On the drive home, my cousin whispered, "We lost time, didn't we?" I nodded. We never spoke of it again. Even now, more than a decade later, I can't explain what happened. But every time I think of that light, my skin crawls, and I wonder, what happened in those hours we can't remember?
I grew up in Mauritius, a place of sun, beaches, and stories. Lots of stories about spirits, most of which I laughed off as a kid. Until the night at Flick and Flack. A group of us decided to camp along the wild beach, away from the tourists. We set up our tents near the tree line, with the sea stretching dark and endless in front of us. The night air was warm, and the rhythm of the waves was soothing. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound that cut through the ocean's roar, a scream. It was a woman's voice, high-pitched and desperate, echoing along the beach. I sat up, straining to hear. My friends stirred, their faces pale in the dim light. The scream came again, closer, then stopped. We held our breath. The night was silent but for the waves. Then came another sound, the rolling thud of coconuts across sand. At first, one, then another, then several, bouncing and tumbling until they struck the sides of our tents. The sound was unnatural, too deliberate, as if someone was pushing them toward us. Then the whispers began. Faint at first, carried on the breeze. Words I couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable, angry, mocking. My skin prickled with every breath of that voice. We didn't wait. In silence, we ripped down the tents, shoved everything into the car, and drove away without speaking. The next morning, we told a local what had happened. He listened without surprise and simply said, "That beach belongs to the spirits. You should not have stayed there." I've never gone back.
I was in a luxury hotel in New York in 2021. The place had immense hallways, thick carpet that muffled any sound, and a cleaning smell that seemed to be trying to hide something. I was in my room. It was already quite late, and I was so tired I fell asleep right away. In the middle of the night, I woke up, but not with a start. It was a noise, laughter, and the sound of feet running on the carpet. I thought, oh no, a noisy family. But I realized it was too late for that. So I got up and went to the door, curious yet apprehensive. My heart was beating a little faster in my chest as I peered through the pee-hole. There she was, a girl maybe 5 years old, with dark hair, wearing a white dress, running back and forth in the hallway. I could hear the high-pitched, almost metallic sound of her laughter. But what truly scared me was seeing that she was completely alone. There was no adults with her, no other children, just her, running and laughing at nothing in that immense empty hallway lit only by the dim emergency light. I waited for a while. I hoped she would go to her room, that someone would come to get her. But she didn't stop. She just kept going back and forth. And the laughter, it started to sound different. It wasn't joyful laughter. It sounded forced, almost hysterical, as if she were laughing because she was scared. Suddenly, while I was thinking of a million things at once, she stopped, right in front of my door. She looked directly at the pee-hole. She couldn't have known I was there, as I was careful not to make a sound, but it was as if she knew. And then, she smiled. A smile I will never forget. She didn't show her teeth. It wasn't a happy child smile. It was a wide, empty smile that stretched from ear to ear, and her eyes were dark and lifeless. I took a step back, my entire body getting goosebumps. The sound of my own gasp seemed deafening. I didn't sleep again that night. I stayed in bed, staring at the door, wondering if it was real, if I should talk to someone, if I was dreaming. At dawn, I went down to check out. I couldn't take it anymore. I asked the receptionist about the girl, describing what I had seen. He told me that no children were registered on that floor, and that no family had checked in overnight. That smile of hers still haunts me. This happened in 2022 while I was working in an old hotel in Sao Paulo. There was a small room, number 23, in the back of the hotel that had no windows besides a small opening in the bathroom. It was considered haunted, creepy, with an energy that felt like a ton of weight. No one had stayed there for a long time. But one night, a new employee, a woman around 50 with a serious expression, introduced herself to me as the housekeeping manager and told me that a guest had checked in to room 23 and that I needed to clean it. I found that strange, but it was my job, so I went to do what she had asked. I grabbed the cart, the keys, and went to the hallway where the light was dimmer and the silence was heavier. It felt like I was moving away from the real world, as if I were entering another dimension. I hesitated for a moment, but I shook my head, convinced myself I was thinking nonsense, and unlocked the door. The smell. It was a smell of earth, of wet wood, mixed with something sweet and putrid. As I entered, I turned on the weak yellowish light the room had, and I saw a man sitting on the edge of the bed. My whole body went cold. He was dressed in a dark suit with a crumpled white collar and a hat that covered part of his face. He was completely motionless, looking at the floor, his head moving minimally from side to side, his old and pale hands resting on his knees. With my heart in my mouth, I asked, "Sir, do you need anything?" He didn't answer. He didn't even turn his head. It was as if he were in a trance. I thought about asking again, but it scared me so much that I couldn't. I left the room, trembling, closed the door, and had that feeling that he was coming after me, but I didn't have the courage to look back. I quickened my pace and went to talk to the general manager. I explained the situation, and when we returned, the room door was unlocked and the man was not there. The bed sheets were perfectly arranged, as if no one had ever sat there. But I noticed something strange. On the nightstand, there was a black and white photo, yellowed with age. It was a couple embracing, the woman in a dark vintage dress, and the man, guess what, in a suit and with a hat. I no longer had words to say anything. The manager couldn't explain it. There was no guest record for that room, and he didn't know why the housekeeping manager had ordered it cleaned. We left everything as it was, closed the door, and the key was put away. I was on vacation with some friends in Los Angeles in 2023. It was the third night there, and it was already dawn when we were coming back from a party. I was staying in a different hotel than my friends. Mine was one of those old ones, maybe from the 50s, with a dark decoration and huge paintings. I was going to my room, which was on the 4th floor. The hallway was long and completely empty. Until, at the end of the hallway, there were 3 people, 2 women and a man. The women were in the hallway, and the man was closing the door. They seemed young, dressed in black. I thought it was just a group of friends leaving. But as I got closer, I noticed something strange. They weren't talking and were completely motionless, standing next to each other, with their arms hanging rigidly at their sides, looking in my direction. Not a casual look. It was a fixed stare, as if they were judging me. It seemed they were angry with me. What seemed like a normal scene quickly became a terrifying one. The increasingly unsettling silence made the sound of my own footsteps on the carpet seem deafening. I quickened my pace, trying to act normal, but my heart was pounding. I had to get to the end of the hallway, where they were, and turn left to then get to my room. It felt like hours of walking. I passed them, trying to avoid eye contact, but by politeness, I quickly and quietly said good evening. I felt their gaze on me, a cold, almost physical weight. I reached my door to my room, unlocked it, and entered as fast as I could, locking the door behind me. I threw myself on the bed, trying to catch my breath. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, fatigue, or the little bit of alcohol I had drunk. The next day, I was checking out as we were going to another city. Before leaving, I asked the receptionist about the group of people in the hallway on my floor. I described their clothes, the way they were standing, and the time we met. He looked at me with a blank expression. He said, "No one is staying on the floor you were on, sir, and that's one of our emptiest floors lately." I thought it was a misunderstanding, or that they had already left, and I preferred not to press the issue. But when I was in the parking lot, loading my bags into the car, I saw them again. The same 3 people, standing near the hotel exit, looking at me. They were wearing the same clothes, in the same positions, with the same expressions on their faces. The only thing I could do was throw the bags in the car and get out of there as fast as I could. My hand was shaking on the steering wheel. I looked back in the rearview mirror a couple of times, and they were still there. That look of theirs, the way they appeared and disappeared. To this day, I wonder who they were and what they wanted from me, or why they wanted me away from there.
I want to tell you about something that happened to me a few years ago. It still gives me chills to think about, and honestly, it made me question a lot of things. It started when we moved into this new apartment. A fresh start, we thought. Little did we know what was waiting. This isn't some campfire story. This is something that really happened. Something that messed with the sense of security I had, especially when it came to my child. It involves a baby monitor, something we bought to give us peace of mind. Instead, it became the source of a fear I wouldn't wish on anyone. When we had Leo, our first baby, it was the most amazing, overwhelming experience. You know how it is, suddenly your whole world revolves around this tiny human. Sleep became a luxury, and every little whimper or sigh had us jumping up. Like most new parents, we wanted to do everything right. make sure he was safe, even when he was sleeping in his own room. So, we got one of those electronic baby monitors. It had a camera, two-way audio, the whole works. It seemed perfect. For the first few weeks, it was exactly what we needed. We could see him breathing, hear his little noises. It was reassuring, knowing we could keep an eye on him without hovering over his crib every 5 minutes. But then things started to get weird. It started subtly. I'd be in the living room, maybe watching TV, and I'd hear these faint sounds coming from the monitor. At first, I thought it was just static, or maybe the neighbors. But it sounded almost like whispering. I couldn't make out any words, just a low, indistinct murmur. I mentioned it to my husband, Mark, but he didn't hear anything. He said I was probably just tired imagining things. And maybe I was. New parenthood does crazy things to your brain. So I tried to brush it off. But it kept happening. The whispers would come and go, sometimes when Leo was completely silent. It started to make me uneasy. I'd turn up the volume on the monitor, trying to decipher what it was. But it was always just below the threshold of understanding. It was like someone was just on the edge of speaking. Then one night, it was different. I was up late, feeding Leo around 3 a.m. After I put him back in his crib, I went back to bed. But I left the monitor on beside me as usual. Everything was quiet for a while, and then I heard it. It was still a whisper, but this time it sounded clearer, closer. It sent a shiver down my spine. The voice, and it definitely sounded like a voice this time, said very softly, "You shouldn't have left him alone." My blood ran cold. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked at the monitor screen, and Leo was there, sleeping peacefully. But the voice, it had sounded so real, so close. It was like someone was right there in his room. I didn't hesitate. I jumped out of bed and ran to his room, my legs shaky. I flicked on the light, expecting I don't even know what. But Leo was just sleeping, soundly, his little chest rising and falling. There was no one else in the room. The window was closed. Everything seemed normal. I went back to our bedroom, still shaking. I looked at the baby monitor, sitting innocently on the nightstand. I didn't want to touch it, but I felt like I had to. I picked it up, my hand trembling, and turned up the volume. Silence. Just the faint white noise you usually hear. For the next few nights, I was on edge. I barely slept, constantly checking on Leo, listening intently to the monitor. The whispers didn't come back. I started to think maybe it had been a one-off, a fluke. Maybe Mark was right and I was just exhausted. Then, about a week later, it happened again. I was in the kitchen, making breakfast. Leo was napping. Suddenly, I heard a sound from the monitor, not a whisper this time. It was a distinct, low chuckle, a male chuckle. My blood ran cold. I froze, my hand clutching the counter. My stomach dropped. This wasn't static. This wasn't my imagination. Something was making noises through the baby monitor. I ran to Leo's room. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my ears. He was still asleep. I scanned the room. Every shadow made me jump. Nothing. I was frantic, confused. This time I knew I wasn't imagining it. I ran back to the kitchen, needing to see the monitor to understand what was happening. But when I got back, the monitor wasn't on the counter anymore. It was on the floor. The screen completely shattered. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't dropped it. Then I screamed for Mark. He came running, his face filled with concern, but before he could even ask what was wrong, he saw the broken monitor. Mark picked it up, his face a mix of disbelief and sheer terror. The device that was meant to protect us was now just a pile of glass and plastic. I said, "We have to leave." Mark didn't hesitate. He knew. We packed our things that same night and just left. We never went back. That broken monitor sat there, untouched, far from us. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I still think I hear a faint whisper. Or maybe it's just my imagination playing tricks on me. But I'll never forget that feeling, that cold dread that washed over me when I heard those words, "You shouldn't have left him alone."
We took over OP Rock from another group in 2009. It was a small mound of dirt and broken mud walls about a couple hundred meters from patrol base Hassanabad. You could see all around from the top, which was why we used it, but being out there alone at night, it had a different kind of danger. When we got there, the place already felt wrong. The air was heavy, like it was hard to breathe. Guys who'd been there before told us to leave the ground alone. I thought they were joking until we had to dig some fighting positions. That's when we started hitting bones, not just water too, handfuls. Some were obviously animal bones, but a few didn't look like that. They were old, weathered. We didn't say much about it. We just pushed the dirt back over and moved on. The nights were the worst. Sometimes the radios would start picking up voices in the middle of the night, languages we didn't recognize. Once I heard Russian. Another time it sounded like someone was speaking right into the mic, even though everyone was asleep. The voice said, "Brose oruzia." Later I learned that means "drop your weapon" in Russian. We had a stray dog out there we called Ugly Betty. She barked a lot at nothing. Sometimes she'd growl at the wall like she could see something walking past us. You'd check with a flashlight and there'd be nothing there. A couple of guys swore they saw figures out in the desert at night, like people moving, but too far to make out. You'd think it was Taliban scouts, but they'd vanish instantly. No footprints, nothing on the thermal. The temperature out there would change in minutes. One night it dropped so fast I could see my breath. Then 10 minutes later, it was back to normal. It didn't make sense. After a while, nobody was sleeping well. Everyone was irritable. We kept hearing strange noises like boots scuffing the dirt behind us, but when you turned around, no one was there. One guy asked to be transferred. He left, and a few weeks later, we heard he was killed by an IED. Out of the original group that stayed at OP Rock with me, only 3 of us made it home. I don't know what that place was. Some say it was built on a mass grave, some say it was cursed. I just know I still dream about it sometimes. I'll wake up and swear I can smell that dust again. And every once in a while, when it's really quiet, I think I hear that voice in my ear. I was Second Lieutenant William Spate, sitting in my dugout in the Ypres Salient, December 15, 1915. The wind carried cold and dread across the mud. My friend, an officer from my company, had been killed earlier that day just beyond the trench lip. I hadn't fully processed the loss, though I tried, not thinking, just staring at the mud, at the candlelight flickering against the damp brick. Then he appeared. Not alive, but unmistakably him. He stood at the edge of my vision with that same quiet look he had when we last spoke, a silent invitation or perhaps a plea. He pointed to the ground. No words, just the gesture. I pushed the men to dig. They unearthed a German tunnel packed with explosives and ready to detonate under our trench. We defused it. Lives were saved. Ypres mud, it sticks. It smells of sorrow and stale fear. Months before, the first and second battles of Ypres had already claimed thousands of lives, and yet death came in odd, quiet moments like this one. We didn't speak of hauntings. We spoke in whispers about frostbite, shell shock, about the gas attacks that had rained down in mid-December. But I never stopped asking, was it him or something else tied to purpose, to memory? I don't claim to understand it. All I know is, that night, something beyond the living reached out. Not to scare me, but to save me. I climbed into the gondola of L8 just after 6 in the morning, August 16, 1942, on Treasure Island. The sea wind was cool, visibility clear. I ran my hands over the controls and took a breath beside my pilot, Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody. I was Ensign Charles Adams. It was my first flight as a commissioned officer. L8 lifted off for a routine anti-submarine patrol from Treasure Island, heading west over the Farallon Islands, Point Reyes, then down Montara, and back home. At about 7:38 a.m., our radio crackled, "Investigating suspicious oil slick, stand by." That splick could mean a submarine. We dropped smoke flares and a few boats saw us circling low above the water, just 30 feet or so. That was the last time confirmed anyone saw us together. Then, contact went silent. Controllers lost us at 8:50 a.m. No radio, nothing. Sometime later, witnesses spotted L8 drifting alone, higher than normal, maybe 2,000 feet. At 10:15 a.m., me, reappeared off Ocean Beach near Fort Funston. The blimp sagged, as if deflating. We seemed at touchdown briefly. Surfers and fishermen grabbed at its ropes, peered in, and found no one. Without warning, L8 slipped free, floated upward, struck a cliff that damaged the propeller, even dislodged a depth charge. It drifted, slow and lopsided, across a golf course, down Mission Street, scraping poles and rooftops until finally it came to rest on Bellevue Avenue in Daly Cali. When rescue crews reached the cockpit, everything was in perfect order. Engines unmolested, radio functioning, instruments untouched. Parachutes and a life raft were still stowed. Only 2 life jackets were gone, but we were required to wear them over water. The gondola door was propped open. Normally, the safety bar kept it closed, but it was unlatched from the inside. No farewell, no struggle, no broadcast. Just the empty cabin of a warship that returned alone. Navy searchers by air, land, sea found nothing. No sign of us afloat, no wreckage, no bodies. A board of inquiry ruled out foul play, mechanical failure, desertion. The official theory was someone leaned out to deploy a marker over the oil slick and slipped and fell. Their partner tried to help and fell too. They drowned. The blimp, now empty, drifted home. But nothing explains how that happened without alarms, without a word. We didn't radio for help. We didn't take the emergency raft. We didn't toss overboard the briefcase of classified documents. Speculation swirled. Japanese submarines, desertion, spies, or something stranger. UFOs, alien abduction. L8 was repaired and flew again. After the war, Goodyear used the gondola, renamed America, for their advertising blimps until 1982. Today, the original gondola, back in L8 markings, sits in the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. So, here I am, silent, stationary. I'm waiting. I watch you peer in, curious. I'm the empty place you shouldn't be able to see into because I should be gone. But I'm not. Tell me, who are you waiting to find? They say there are places in this world where the veil between our reality and something else is thin. Places where ancient things sleep, waiting for someone to stumble into their territory, for someone to forget that not everything that haunts this world has a name you can find in a book. This is the story of Alex Corvine, a man who, in the summer of 1989, sought solitude and peace in a remote chalet deep in the Transylvanian woods. What he found instead was a slow, creeping descent into a madness he couldn't explain. A darkness that had been watching the trees for centuries and for some reason had decided he was its next meal. His only legacy, a half-filled diary and a series of cassette tapes left behind in the silent house. What you are about to hear are his final words, his final moments, as he pieced together the horrifying truth of what was haunting him. The last tape, it still makes no sense, and it gives no comfort. This is the Corvine Curse.
Tape 1, August 14th, 1989. I came out here to the Carpathians for the quiet, to write, to be alone. The chalet is old, built with thick wood beams that smell of damp earth and pine. It's perfect. It's so far off the beaten path, the nearest neighbor is almost 2 kilometers away. You can go for days and not see another soul. At first, it was peaceful, the kind of silence that's rare in the modern world. I spent my days walking through the forest, the canopy so thick the sunlight barely reached the ground. The trees, they have a kind of weight to them. They feel old, ancient. I've started a habit of just sitting on my porch at night, listening to the forest breathe, the wind through the pines, the rustle of unseen animals in the underbrush. But lately, the quiet has changed. The wind sometimes sounds less like a natural force and more like a whisper, a low sibilant sound that almost, but not quite, forms a word. It's so subtle, I keep telling myself it's just my mind playing tricks, the kind of thing that happens when you're this isolated. But the feeling persists, the feeling that the whisper is coming from somewhere specific, the darkness just beyond the tree line. Tape 4, August 28th. The whispers are getting clearer. I'm starting to hear them even when the wind is still. They're not words, not in any language I know. They're a kind of droning chant, a low hum that vibrates through the house, through the floorboards and into my bones. Last night I was awake for hours, certain someone or something was outside. I went to the window, pressed my face to the cold glass. Nothing, just a wall of black. But the sound was right there. I know it was. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I felt watched. I started a new habit. I can't explain why. I find myself walking the perimeter of my small property every evening before it gets dark. I feel like I need to mark the edges, to know where my space ends and theirs begins. Today, on my walk, I found a stone on the ground near the old gnarled oak tree that sits at the back of the property. It was perfectly smooth, and on its surface, a strange symbol had been etched. It looked like a rune, but it wasn't from any alphabet I recognized. It was a closed loop with 3 sharp prongs extending from its top. Primitive. Pagan, maybe. I took a picture of it. I've been researching it all afternoon. Nothing. I don't know what it means. I don't know who put it there. Tape 7, September 10th. I'm starting to get scared. My skepticism is gone. I don't care about rational explanations anymore. They're gone. The things I'm seeing now, the things I'm feeling, they are not of this world. The cold, it's in the house. It's not the chill of the mountains. It's a deep, unnatural cold that sits in the corner of every room. Last night, I was in the living room by the fire. The logs were burning bright, hot, but a part of the room right behind me was freezing. I could feel the cold radiating from it, like a presence had just walked in and stood there, watching me, but not touching the warmth of the fire, just waiting. And the symbols, the runic symbol, I found another one, carved into the wooden doorframe of my bedroom. It's the exact same as the one I found on the stone. This wasn't here yesterday. I know it wasn't. It's crude but deliberate. Someone carved this into my home, and I've seen no one. The diary. I've been writing everything down. Everything. I'm trying to find a pattern. The symbols, the cold, the whispers, they are getting closer, more frequent. It feels like a ritual, like I'm part of some kind of process. This isn't a simple haunting. It's something ancient, something that wants to bind me to this place, something that wants my silence. Tape 12, September 21st. I think I've figured it out, or at least I've found a lead. In an old, forgotten book I found in the attic, the carvings, they are a form of pagan warding, used to bind a spirit, a demon, or a presence to a specific place. The carvings, they're everywhere. I'm finding them all over the chalet, faded and hidden. But the ones appearing now, they are a variation, a reversal. They aren't meant to bind. They are meant to prepare. The presence is here, all the time now. I see its shadow in the corner of my eye. It's tall, slender. It doesn't have a shape, but a lack of one. It just feels empty. And it's always looking at me. Always. The whispers. They aren't whispers anymore. They're a hum. A constant, low-frequency hum that fills my head and never stops. It's so loud I can barely think. I can barely sleep. I haven't slept in 2 days. I found something else on my walk today. A small dead bird. But it wasn't just dead. It was laid out on the path, its wings meticulously spread open, forming another one of those prongs. That symbol. It's a sign. It's a message. It's a declaration. I don't think it wants to just kill me. I think it wants to take me. To make me a part of this place like it did to others before. The ritual is nearly complete. I can feel it. The humming is so loud. I can't.
There's a certain kind of fear that sticks with you. It's the unsettling realization that the ordinary world can suddenly twist, revealing something deeply wrong, something that lingers in the back of your mind long after the moment has passed. These are those kinds of stories, real encounters that brushed the edges of what we understand, leaving those who experience them with a haunting unease that's hard to shake. Tonight, we delve into the true accounts of those who found themselves face to face with the inexplicable.
It was late, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. I was walking home from a friend's place, a familiar route I'd taken countless times. The streetlights cast these long, distorted shadows, but there was no one else around, just the quiet hum of the city settling down. Then I saw him. He was coming towards me in the distance, and even from far away, I could tell there was something off. He was tall, unnaturally thin almost, wearing a suit that seemed too formal for the hour. As he got closer, I noticed he was moving in this strange, jerky way, like he was dancing. But it wasn't a happy dance. It was unsettling, disjointed. And then I saw his face. His head was tilted back, his eyes fixed on the sky, and his mouth, it was stretched into this impossibly wide smile. Not a friendly smile, not even a manic one. It looked painful, like his skin was being pulled taut against his teeth. I felt this immediate spike of fear. My gut screamed at me to get away. I crossed the street, trying to keep my eyes forward, but I couldn't help glancing back. He had stopped dancing. He was just standing there, perfectly still, but now he was parallel to me on the other side of the road, still smiling up at the sky. It was the stillness that got to me. That and the feeling that I was being watched, even though his eyes weren't on me. My heart was pounding in my chest. I sped up my pace, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. I risked another look, and that's when my blood ran cold. He was moving again, not walking, but crawling, slowly, deliberately towards me, that horrifying smile still plastered on his face. I froze, paralyzed by this surreal nightmare unfolding in the middle of a quiet street. Then just as suddenly as it started, he stopped. He slowly stood back up, turned away from me, and resumed that bizarre, unsettling dance, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't stop running until I was safely inside my apartment, every shadow on the wall seeming to hold that grotesque smile. To this day, I can't shake the image of that man, his eyes on something I couldn't see, that smile that promised nothing but terror. Working in a hospital, you get used to a lot of things. The long hours, the constant beeping of machines, even the heavy atmosphere that sometimes settles over the wards. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened one night a few years ago. I was working the night shift on a floor that had a few long-term care patients. We had one elderly gentleman who was nearing the end, and sadly he passed away quietly in his sleep. Protocol is protocol. The room was cleaned, prepped, and a new patient was admitted the next day. It was a woman in her late 60s, recovering from surgery. I checked on her a few times throughout my shift and everything seemed fine. Then, around 3 in the morning, her call light went off. Her voice on the intercom was panicked, barely a whisper. She kept repeating, "There's a man in here. There's a man sitting in my room." I rushed to her room, my mind racing. Maybe she was disoriented from the medication, but when I got there, she was wide awake, her eyes darting nervously towards the corner of the room. There was no one there. I tried to reassure her, explaining that she might be having a bad dream, but she was adamant. She described a man sitting in the chair beside her bed, just watching her. She said he was old, frail-looking almost, and had this heavy, sad presence. What made my blood run cold was her description. It matched the patient who had passed away in that very room just the day before. I tried to stay calm, checked her vitals, made sure she was physically okay, but her terror felt so real. We moved her to a different room for the rest of the night. Even now, years later, I sometimes think about that night. What did she see? Was it just a trick of the mind? Or was there something else lingering in that room? I've heard stories from other nurses over the years, whispers about certain rooms, certain times of night. It makes you wonder what unseen things might be happening around us, even in a place as clinical as a hospital. Growing up, the layout of our house always made me a little uneasy at night. My bedroom door faced the end of a long, dark hallway. When I was a kid, I had this habit of lying in bed, staring out into that hallway, even though it was usually pitch black. That's when it started. At first, it was just a feeling, a sense of something moving at the far end of the hall. Then I started to see it, a shadow. Not a defined figure, just a darker patch in the darkness. But it seemed to be moving, slowly, incredibly slowly. It would drift towards my room. And as it got closer, I started to make out a shape within the shadow, something long and thin in its hand. A knife. The terror was overwhelming, but I couldn't move. I was completely frozen, my body refusing to respond. I would lie there, eyes wide with fear, watching this shadowy figure inch its way towards me, the glint of a blade almost visible in the gloom. It felt like it took hours for it to reach my doorway, and then it would just stop, hovering there, a silent, menacing presence. This went on for months. I was constantly afraid to go to sleep. Then, as I got into my early teens, the visual aspect stopped, but something else started. Sleep paralysis. I would wake up in the middle of the night, completely unable to move, my body locked in place, and then the sounds would start. A low murmur at first, then growing into a cacophony of voices, a huge, angry crowd shouting just outside my door. I couldn't make out any words, just the raw, terrifying sound of collective rage. These episodes would be so intense, so real, that I would be drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. The only way it would stop is if my brain finally gave out, and I would mercifully fall back to sleep. Even now, as an adult, I still get the occasional bout of sleep paralysis, and sometimes in those fleeting moments between wakefulness and sleep, I swear I can still feel that shadowy presence at the end of the hall and hear the faint echo of the distant, angry crowd.